Right. Let me kick off then. So welcome everybody. Welcome to our webinar, Innovations in Youth Justice. It's part of our series, Children's Rights in Action, in which we're investigating ways to reform our laws, policies and practices to protect the human rights of children. I'd like to start by acknowledging the elders of the Camaragal lands where I'm joining from, and also the elders on the lands that you're all joining from as well. Most of you participating in this event will be well aware of the many challenges we face in our youth justice systems in Australia. So I'm not going to spend time detailing them tonight because I know it's an audience that's expert on these issues. As Australia's National Children's Commissioner, it's my view that the way we treat children who come into contact with the police and the youth justice systems is one of the biggest human rights challenges we face in Australia today. Australia lags other developed countries, including in our use of solitary confinement, which we often call lockdowns or night mode, and many other areas within our youth justice system. And this has been a particularly difficult week for all of us. We've seen the tragic death of a 16-year-old Indigenous boy in Perth, which has horrified many of us joining here tonight. Australia's failure to apply evidence and human rights-based principles is the reason why I'm currently undertaking a project on youth justice and child wellbeing reform across Australia. We've received over 160 submissions, including from many of you joining tonight, and I thank you for making that effort. And we're currently consulting with children and families around the country. As part of this work, which will culminate in a report to the Australian Parliament, we're also looking at what we can learn from developments internationally, and hence this webinar this evening. Oberstown Children Detention Campus in Dublin is Ireland's national service for young people remanded in custody or sentenced by the courts. Oberstown has undergone a major transformation in recent years, and I'm delighted that we have with us tonight Damien Hernon, who is the director of Oberstown, to share this story. Damien has 30 years' experience with children in detention and a range of relevant qualifications.
I understand you. What?
Including an executive MBA.
I can. Wait a bit.
Could we ask everyone to turn their microphones off again? While Damien and others in Ireland are quick to acknowledge that they still face many challenges, the story of change at Oberstown can give us some hope that we too in Australia can move forward with reform that protects the human rights of children. After Damien's presentation, I will open to questions in the chat, actually the Q&A function. So if you want to put questions in, use the Q&A function. I can't promise that we'll get to everyone's questions, but we will do our best. So on that note, I'm going to say thank you very much to Damien for joining us all the way from Dublin, and over to you, Damien.
Okay, thanks very much, Anne. I'll just share my screen now. Look, just first of all, thank you, Anne, and delighted to be here on behalf of Oberstown. Just to provide some context to the journey that Ireland has been on, specifically in relation to young people and children in conflict with the law. And I suppose that's a very purposeful phrase that I use, young people and children in conflict with the law, because the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child speaks about anybody under 18 as a child. They are not adults, and as such, they ought to receive the same set of norms that children in the rest of society receive, and the norms that apply to adults shouldn't apply. We signed up to this convention in 1992, and I think Australia signed up in 1990. It's my intention this morning or this evening to bring you on a journey from inception to the current state and future thinking. It will be a warts and all experience. As Anne said, we don't claim to know everything. We've been on a cycle, I suppose, of improvement. We've known dark days. We've lived experience of dark days. There's been a transformative piece over recent years, which has its genesis, I suppose, in a rights-based approach supported by participation and advocacy. And I hope that by bringing you on this journey, there might be a few light bulb moments, there might be a few seeds planted, and ultimately the current crisis in Australia might be alleviated. I regularly get asked, as the director of a national facility, what keeps me awake at night. And I can tell you that it's not strategy, it's not finance, it's not HR, it's not industrial relations, it's not operations. The one thing that keeps me awake on a regular basis is the potential death of somebody on campus. So I can't imagine how you feel at the moment, given the current state of affairs and the recent untimely death of that young person in custody within the last 7 to 10 days. And my thoughts are with him and his family today as we embark on this journey. So look, how am I going to do this? In order to go forward, I should look backwards. And in my mind's eye, I'm in the mountains in Australia, or I could be in County Wicklow in Ireland, but I suppose the absence of rain present up until very recently, Ireland has been governed by legislation that predates the Irish state. Legislation dates back to 1908 Children Act, and it was when we were still under control of our near neighbours here. And to be antiquated piece of legislation that's been in play probably up to 2006. In fairness, there were different iterations across the way. Even the language in it speaks of the capacity to send a child to prison if they are deemed to be unruly and depraved. So up until 15 years ago in Ireland, if I deemed that a young person was unruly and depraved, I could bring them to court and the judge could send them to prison as a 15-year-old. Thankfully, that is no longer the case. This dated legislation has been replaced by the 2001 Act, which came fully into being in 2006. And in relation to detention, the underlying ethos is that detention should be used as a last resort and for the shortest amount of time. And in this respect, the Act upholds the UN Convention on the Rights of Child of those under 18, that it should be for the last resort and the shortest appropriate time. But to support that piece of legislation, there's a huge groundswell of activity in relation to community interventions, family group conferences, restorative justice, and I suppose the whole Garda diversion programme, bail supervision. There's a conversation going on in Ireland at the minute in relation to the potential to expand and extend the Garda diversion programme to 18 to 24-year-olds. So at a point in time in the future, there's real potential that in Ireland, nobody under 24 years of age will be in detention in prison. They'll be in a purpose-built facility with a purpose-built programme that recognises the neurological diversity and the challenges that some of these young people face. Anne has mentioned it there. Oberstown is a reconfigured service. It's an amalgamation of different schools, and it was, I suppose, probably developed around 2012. There was an investment of 55 to 60 million euro to build a new campus, and I'll get to that a little bit later. We're very fortunate in that we've always been in either the Department of Education or the Department of Children, and that's really important in terms of not being seen as an agent of the justice or so being in children is really important for us. At the minute, we have capacity for 46 young people, and as a national service, that's a very small percentage of young people that we have. 40 of those spaces are for males and 6 of those spaces for females. Over the last 6 years, we've only had 4 years, we've only had 6 females throughput on the campus. So they're underrepresented in detention and campus, but not too dissimilar to the Australian scenario. We do have an ethnic population here, Irish travellers, who are overpopulated in detention. And we've recently hired a family traveller liaison worker who's from the traveller background to work specifically with the young people on the campus. So that's a big piece of work. Prior to the legislative changes, young people under 16 were catered for in 3 different schools across Ireland. Oberstown Boys School looked after younger people with lower tariff offensive, and it was lower tariff offences in a low security setting. Oberstown Girls Centre looked after girls, and Trinity House School looked after higher tariff offences, and it had a higher level of security. Beyond that, then there was a fingerless child and adolescent remand centre, which remanded and which looked after remand young people and assessment young people. But at that time, young people over 16 were catered for in a prison, in St. Patrick's Institution, which was part of an adult prison known as Mountjoy, which is on the North Circular Road in Dublin city centre. Grey, dark, Victorian building, high walls, no light, very dehumanising conditions. And St. Patrick's Institution was run under the aegis of the Irish Prison Service. There were bars, there were corridors, there were landings with 40 prisoners and 2 staff. There were uniforms, there were pain compliant policies in place. Some of the children had to wear these green overalls that you see in front of you. And behind all this, what you have is a very vulnerable, traumatized child who didn't get the services that were required in that prison, and ultimately it was seen as a very bad place. Because our job in Oberstown is to look after these young people. Beyond that, though, it's to maximise their potential. And in that prison setting, it was found to be pretty horrific. So in 1985, there was an inquiry into the penal system in Ireland, and effectively it became known as the Whittaker Report. And the Whittaker Report called for the immediate shutdown of St. Patrick's Institution. It described it as an environment that would contribute to further delinquency of the juvenile rather than any rehabilitative function. It called out the fact that it was a monument to the failure of the state, and it was a blot on our nation. The report was shocking in terms of an adult regime being in place, no specialist staff, pain compliant policies, bullying, intimidation, etc., and an atmosphere of neglect, abuse, physical, emotional, etc. So not an ideal place to look after young people who are in conflict with the law. This was, in effect, probably the catalyst for change in an Irish situation. Further to this, then, this conversation raged on, I suppose, throughout the 90s. And at some point in time, around 2007, an interdepartmental expert group on youth detention decided that the appropriate response was to build a self-contained campus which would look after young people in conflict with the law up to under 18 years of age. The decision was made to build it on the Oberstown campus, which made sense because already there were 3 schools there. So it was about creating efficiencies, but also using the land that was available to the state. We were very fortunate in that the legislation was there to support this move, and also the government initiative was there to support this move. And throughout the course of Oberstown, it's always been on the government agenda, regardless of who's in power. But I suppose, in an Irish perspective, we're very fortunate to have a kind of centrist political environment. There's no extreme left, no extreme right. So that's really positive. And then significant amount of money was made available to fund the build. And I suppose when you think about it, we no longer want it to be a monument to the failure of the state. To support that initiative, then there was a separate agency set up called the Irish Youth Justice Service, which operated under the Department of Children and Youth Affairs. And this had the responsibility for leading and driving the youth justice reform. It was chaired by Michelle Shannon, who effectively drove lots of the change, supported by a lady called Silda Langford in the department, who was a real change agent for the campus. Strategies from 2008 bringing us up to 27. The initial strategy, 2008-2010, was the National Youth Justice Strategy, which had responsibility for implementing the whole Children Act 2001 to ensure that the programs provided were effective and to achieve the best possible outcomes for children. 2014, 2018 then seen us move into a space where we were talking about change in behaviour, where we were evidencing appropriate evidence-based interventions or behaviour, help manage behaviour. Then the current 21 to 27 speaks of governance, monitoring and support, the criminal justice system and processes. And from an Oberstown perspective, it looks like capability, capacity, sustainability, the age cohort 18 to 24-year-olds aftercare. Now, the next section makes much sense because it's all photographs, it's all imagery of Oberstown, I suppose, and it's the fact that you can't see it is problematic. But it's fair to say that the build was pretty new, it's pretty modern. There was a huge consultation around mentality, which create separate living spaces. We have blocks of units. Yeah, we have separate. I'm just trying to see if it'll work again. It's not working there now, no?
Omar has shared your slides. We can see your slides. The audio is a bit broken up, but I think we can just about hear you. So at the moment we're looking at, can you see what we see? 6 slides of the building,
okay.
the building process.
Excellent. So the top left slide is the build process. In the middle there you have the new construction taking place, and on the extreme right and the top left you have the existing buildings. So they were in operation while the build was taking place. So that created a very difficult work environment. What you have there in the top left picture are at the bottom are blocks of 3 units which are interconnected. They're 10-bedded units, but we only ever keep 8 young people in them. They all have their own internal spaces, external spaces. As you move across the pictures, then you see different examples of what it looks like from different viewpoints. On the extreme right, then you have the AstroTurf pitch with the sports hall behind it. On the bottom left, then you have the entrance, the visitors' entrance. And Omar, if you could just move to the next slide, then I'll just talk a little bit more about that. Yeah, so here we are internally. We have the school, we have a woodwork class on the left, we have the admissions hub, I suppose, in the middle. And again, it's about the creation of space, the creation of light, because that evokes the environment, evokes a certain response. And if you're in grey, dark, dank buildings, that's the type of response you get from young people. And just on the bottom left here is a picture of the sports hall. And behind that yellow door there is the room we call a triathlon room, which is fairly innovative because we don't have a swimming pool, but what we do is we run, we cycle, and we row. And we're very fortunate that the guy who looks after this for us is a professional triathlete. He's also a young man with lived experience of the justice system. He spent some time in prison, has come through the other side, and now is given back in working in Oberstown. And if I was to say to you that this is the hottest activity in the place, it is, because not only does Jerry work with them on their physical fitness, it's about spiritual stuff. It's about, actually, there is a way around this, lad. So it's really important to have people with lived experience working in facilities like ours. Omar, if you could just go on to the next slide, thank you. Okay, so the top picture there is a direct quote from a Maya Angelou poem called I Rise. So we work with a guy called Joe Caslin, who is well known in Europe in terms of being a mural artist. A part of an initiative with the young people as part of the President's Award, and I'll get to that later on, was to create murals at the front of the units. And this is the quote they chose. There's 2 elements to it, but they were involved in the concept, they were involved in the research, and they were involved in the painting activity, and it all contributed to an award at the end. Bottom left there is what a typical bedroom would look like on remand, on admission, I suppose. As young people stay with us a little bit longer, they personalise the room with photos, with posters, etc. Just on the left, behind the curtain, is a shower facility, a toilet facility, and a wash hand basin. And 10 years ago, one of the units on campus had to do a thing called toilet run at night time, which effectively meant young people had to knock their door at 11 o'clock to ask to use the toilet on the corridor, which was dehumanizing in itself. So from a bedroom perspective, the elements of dignity and respect have been looked after, elements of health and safety, and elements of fire load have been looked after. If I could show you the other end of the room, what you'd see in the wall is what we call a media vision panel, which contains a TV, a radio, lots of the systems in terms of call buttons, emergency buttons, and I suppose our fire alarm systems, etc. This room has a fire suppression system built into the roof that in the event that there's a fire identified, it just floods the roof and puts it out. Notwithstanding that, all the materials in it are non-flammable, and the young people have some storage under the bed, but beyond that they have wardrobes outside to look after their bigger items, I suppose. In the middle then we have a typical lounge, and on the right each unit has a yard. So that's just an overview of what the campus looks like. Omar, if you could just go on one piece. And yeah, so unrest on campus, it's the kindest way I could put it. You can click on, yeah, Omar, that's okay. So in terms of the process between 2014 to 2017, probably one of the most difficult times in my work history in terms of amalgamating the different schools onto a new campus. You had different staff groups, you had different terms and conditions. The buy-in was limited. There was no incentive for people to opt out. The build project was ongoing. Elements of the build were very poor, and it became a very insecure, unstable environment due to the nature of the amalgamation, due to the nature of the build, and due to the nature of some of the young people that we were working with. We effectively were dealing with a powder keg. There was regular industrial action, and despite trying to be proactive on a trade union perspective, we just couldn't seem to get ahead of this. Omar, if you can click on. Okay, so Omar, if you just move it on one, then we're going to come to in the top right there, you will see an incident that occurred on the 29th of August 2016, probably our darkest day. There was a major fire, and we lost a unit, major riot. And just to recount that day for you, it was a day whereby industrial action was taking place. We had agreed with the trade union that there would be limited staffing for a 3-hour period between 9 a.m. and 12 p.m. and there was a picket placed on the front of the campus. That morning I was away delivering induction training to a group of staff, and maybe 10 minutes into the induction I got a call from the HR manager to say house 2 is gone, or unit 2 is gone. And I replied something along the lines of, what do you mean it's gone? I was probably much more explicit in my response. There was a couple of expletives, and I made my way back to the campus in 10 minutes. I came in through the picket. I asked people to leave the picket to come back into the campus. They did. And in 60 minutes, we initiated an emergency plan. There were probably 100 different responses in that 60 minutes, which mitigated against the loss of life. Because what had happened was staff had been under instruction not to open doors unless there were 2 people per door. One staff member stepped out of that instruction, opened the door, young person got access to their keys and began to release other young people. So our first task was to secure that building. And what we did was we effectively locked the young people in. We master locked them into the building, because as we were leaving the building, we could double lock doors, and we put 2 or 3 doors between them and the outside of the unit. Second move then was to empty another unit of staff and young people. And within that unit, there was a young person who'd been accused of a sexual offence who was actually the target of the other young people. So there was a potential assault, a potential death on campus that day. But due to the actions of staff within the first hour, we were able to mitigate against that. The process then was about closing it down, was containing it and managing the pinch points. And we did that throughout the day. There was ongoing negotiation between staff, with police officers tried on several occasions to try and end the incident, but ultimately it resulted in a fire and the loss of a building. There was one injury on that day. A staff member got hurt. The loss of a building, the media attention, all that stuff you bounce back from, but physical injury is very difficult to bounce back from. So to limit it to one was really a good outcome. So you can imagine what the outcry was like in the public, in the media. It wasn't helped by the fact that when we had these young people back in the units, our single separation, or what you might define solitary confinement piece, was very poor. Our recording, our communication let us down in that regard, and they spent this. I think they spent up to 9 days at some point on single separation. We were taken to court by some of the young people. There was a court case about it, but in effect, we won the court case because the judge deemed the response appropriate given the extraordinary circumstances that we faced. And out of that then, in the development of our children's rights policy framework, Rule 12 was developed, which gives the director the authority to suspend all the rules subject to certain conditions if we ever faced such an emergency again. We had an incident in September that went on for maybe 15 or 16 hours, but nothing to the degree of this. And then on the 22nd of December, we were in what's called the Workplace Relations Commission, which settles workplace disputes. But up until the 22nd of December, there was a threat to have all-out strike, all-out industrial action, and we would have been really struggling to manage after that. So when the dust settles, and a couple of years after this, and when you reflect on it and you think about it and you think, my God, they were difficult times. 2016 was a tough year. When I think about it, when I reflect on it, I also think that maybe it was a catalyst for people to realise and to understand what could go wrong on a campus like ours unless we had our business together, unless we were ahead of it, unless we were united, unless we had the environment, the systems and the human behaviour all boxed off, that this is what we could face into the long term. So 2017, if you could just move on, Omar. So 2017, I suppose this slide for me is the bridge. How did we get from where we were to where we are? And on the left of the picture there is it's called the Shaky Bridge. It's in Cork, which is a city in the south of Ireland. If you stand in the middle of that bridge and bounce, the bridge shakes. Kids swim off this bridge on a regular basis. So in terms of bridging where we were and where we got to, I think this was an excellent analogy. And 2 years ago, young people were part of an art exhibition in the Irish Museum of Modern Art. And one of the young people, ironically, painted a picture of the Shaky Bridge, and it's a fair reflection of the picture you see in front of you. But I suppose behind all this, Oberstown was subject to numerous reviews. And out of that, we set up a process called the RIG, the Recommendations Implementation Group, which came up with 120 recommendations that Oberstown had to implement within a very tight time frame in order to move on from this dark place. Around 60 of those recommendations related to young people, around 40 related to staff, the rest were around governance, policy, systems and community. It was a very tough place to be, and people talk about having energy, drive and commitment, and those words are easy to say, but to be putting in 14, 15-hour days on a regular basis was very difficult. It was a very difficult journey, and there was a core group of staff, there was leadership, there was different initiatives that contributed to that. Now I'm going to take you through some of the initiatives that we did to get us there. It's not exhaustive, and it's covered much more eloquently in the book that's recently been published by Ursula and Pat Bergen in relation to the journey of juvenile detention in Ireland. So we had to look at the environment, and we had to refit the environment. We had to make it secure. We had to refit all the doors and all the windows on the campus because the doors were very poor. And when you have a facility that's supposed to be secure, that's not secure, it affects everybody's attitude, mentality, and the ambience of the place. So that was a huge piece of work. We had to look at our systems of work, reframe them, refresh them, and come up with new ways of doing things. And then we had to look at our human behaviour, be that our adult behaviour, be that young person's behaviour, and we had to come up with different ways of managing that. One of our biggest initiatives then was to go on the offensive, I suppose, with the media, with the broadsheets, because the red tabs will report whatever they want to report, but the whole issue of language became very important. We didn't want our young people referred to as thugs or gangsters or scumbags. We wanted to change the language that people associated with what happened in Oberstown, and that took place over a number of months and years through different stakeholder events, through different media campaigns. And this is all really about trying to effect change about how young people are viewed in society, because it doesn't win votes. It's, you know, there's still a population out there who think throw away the key or whatever, but we're torn on that. We're torn on that because ultimately these young people are the future of Ireland, and the more we can invest in them at this point, the greater impact we can have on society. Our whole inspection process has changed throughout the years. We're inspected on an annual basis by HICWA, who are the Health Inspection Quality Assurance Team. We had a recent inspection between the 12th and the 14th of November across 4 days, and we're measured now against our Children's Rights Policy Framework. In doing that, we are measured against a system that works. In 2016, our single separations, or as you would call them, solitary confinements, were at 3,000 per annum. In 21, they were down to 600. So a huge emphasis on single separation and solitary confinement. Procedural issues around it, monitoring, governance, assurances. I get a text every day at 2 o'clock to let me know who's on single separation. If they're on it, still on it at 8 o'clock, there's a requirement for authorization from a senior manager. We developed a framework called KeyHop, which allowed us really put policies and procedures into place upon which we built a journey for young people. So big moves along that neck of the woods. In recent years then, we've partnered with industry leaders. We've developed programs around barista, fitness training, forklift training, Atlantic Youth Trust, sailing initiatives, and all these contribute to the growth of the campus. As I said, that's just a small flavour. The previous slide is a direct quote from a young person who at 14 years of age in committing a robbery, had killed somebody. A journalist was in contact with us and wanted to do a number about numbers in Oberstown, but we brought him up. He spent the day with us, and we had a very good conversation, and he produced this article in a national newspaper, and the first section of it is a direct quote from that young person. And if we think about sliding doors, this young person was in Oberstown on remand just before Christmas one year. Despite everything from the professionals asking the judge to keep him here, he was released, and 4 weeks later, in the committal of a robbery, he stabbed someone and they died. He will spend the next 12 to 15 years in prison. The slide that's on the sheet there now, I suppose, just brings us up to where we are currently. And the top left, we have Uachtaráin Ahern, the President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins, who sponsors the President's Award, Goshka, which is similar to the Duke of Edinburgh Award, which all young people in Oberstown commit to once they come in. And we have a very successful run on that, I suppose, because we have numerous bronze medals, numerous silver medals, and I think we're approaching about 7 or 8 gold medals at this point in time, which is significant. Somebody's made a comment recently, the only place you get gold Goshka medals is in Oberstown or private school. If we go to the top right then of this slide, this is a community initiative in terms of our art exhibition for the opening of a local heritage centre in Lusk. Really welcomed by the community, great initiative, and I suppose what it did was allow people to have different conversations about the young people who live in Oberstown. The bottom right down here, in 2022 we took on a major project as part of the President's Award, whereby we developed maybe 16 pieces of art, which are 10 by 10, 12 by 12. They're big pieces of art. They were ultimately displayed in the Irish Museum of Modern Art, which is a fantastic building. It's a national facility, and they are now being put on an electronic repository for the whole world to see. This particular image on the bottom right there from a young person who effectively is pulling back the darkness and into light, and is speaking about respect, is speaking about love, and is about kindness. And the theme of the exhibition was riding away from the storm. 10 pictures when it was on exhibition in Image, and it talks about when I came into Oberstown I could barely read or write, and now we've completed a junior cert, which is a national state exam. So this young person left Oberstown fully equipped with qualifications, with a catering qualification, he was about to maximise his potential. And in March or April of this year, I got a phone call from someone to tell me that he'd been knocked down by a bus while walking through his local town, and he was dead. So it just raises questions me around destiny, around fate. This fella left here, you know, trying to do well, and he's no longer with us. In the centre of the picture here, a significant initiative we took on in 2023, again as part of the President's Award. There's an annual garden competition in Ireland called Bloom. It's similar to the Chelsea Garden Show that exists in London. The exhibition takes place in the Phoenix Park in Dublin. We have gardeners from Ireland developing exhibition gardens. We took on this project with a designer whereby the young people, the concept, the design. You hear me now? Hello?
Keep going, Damien. Keep going,
okay,
Damien.
Yeah. Okay, so good. Say that. And just to describe this, that the garden was called the Rise Garden. And if you take it from the left, it describes the journey through Oberstown. They come in through a rocky path. They have a little bit of a seat. And the mural here, assisted by Joe Caslin, talks about the bottom picture when they come in, they're broken. In the middle, they get a hand up from staff, and then they rise. And they leave out to the right on a much smoother path. But the provide are symbolic of the support provided by staff here. There are mirrors within the garden as well, which speaks to the opportunities to reflect on what's happened, what I've done, and how to change my life. And then the red corrugated tin is actually being contained and being felt safe. So this exhibition went on across 3 or 4 days, and 120,000 people went through it. We had a team of people on duty throughout those days, and we provided media training to them because we expected they might get a bit of stick from some individuals. And true to form, a number of people who viewed the garden were very dismissive and derogatory, I suppose, in their commentary. But our staff were able to say to them, hang on a second, have you any understanding of what these kids have come through? Have you ever put yourself in their shoes? Have you ever thought about what it might be like? And have you ever thought about the journey that they have to travel? And it's fair to say that some of the people left the garden in tears. Some of the people left the garden actually surprised and elated by what goes on in Oberstown. And beyond all that then, not that I'm competitive or anything, we also won a silver gilt medal, which is effectively second place in the category that we were in. So I suppose this is where we are. That's the final slide, Omar. And it's all been driven, I suppose, by not wanting to be a monument to the failure of the state. It's been driven by not wanting to be a blot on the nation. And hopefully you've got something out of this today, and I'm happy to take some questions. Sorry about the technology. There we go.
Thank you, Damien. And we have lost your picture for some reason, but we can hear you loud and clear. And thank you for persevering despite the tech problems. While other people are thinking about questions, oh, we have you back now. There you are. Thank you for that. I've got a couple of questions, but I'm encouraging everyone to put their questions into the Q&A tab. While I wanted to ask you, Damien, you've told me before about the fact that children's participation is a core part of the operating model, using the Laura Lundy model, which is well known around the world. I wondered if you could say a little bit about how that, what that looks like in terms of the children's participation and the role of the advocate. I think you have an advocate within the facility, that a special position.
Yeah, so I alluded to it there in my presentation that the Children's Rights Policy Framework came out of a need to develop a system of work here, and it's based on a rights-based. It's influenced by the Laura Lundy model in terms of giving young people influence. And I just want to give you a very recent example of that in terms of young people finding their voice. So the Campus Council is well established. It looks after day-to-day operations here, the young people feedback. And for me, it's kind of like a booking.com or TripAdvisor. We have to take that feedback and we have to do something with it if it adds value to the young people's lives. But in any institution, any residential institution, conversations eternally about food, the quality of food. We don't get enough, we don't get blah, blah, blah. So very recently we held a food conference with the young people, facilitated by our advocacy officer and one of the senior managers. And the output of that food conference is actually a systemic change to how we do our business here. It's created new rosters, new ways of working, new menus that have been on trial for the last 8 to 12 weeks, and the effect has been really significant. And behind all this, we want young people to figure out that there is a socially acceptable way of affecting change. And I think Children's Rights Policy Framework has contributed to that, because the advocacy officer encourages the participation. It's supported by unit managers at all levels, and young people now know there are processes to put their questions into, and they can see outcomes and results from it. We have developed it so much so that any senior manager that's been recruited for the campus has to be interviewed by young people, because your experience is great, but young people can see straight through some people. If you're not the right fit for here, and if young people aren't at the very core of what you do, well then maybe Oberstown isn't for you. So that's how the Children's Rights Policy Framework, that's how participation has really been emboldened in campus. And as part of an ongoing process, we review the different rules on a regular basis at different team meetings. We review the procedures that support the Children's Policy Framework at different processes as well, to ensure that they're fit for purpose, they're up to date. And what it does, it provides a level of assurance and governance, not just to me, but to the board and the department, that we're doing things appropriately. So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Damien. I've got a couple of other questions, but I'll go to questions from the audience now. Oh yes, I'm just going to try and keep up with them. So one is about, can you see these, Damien? You probably can't. How do you manage children with severe cognitive impairment and developmental delay in relation to education and vocational training?
We're very fortunate in that we have a provider on site, a national provider in assessment, consultation, therapeutic services, and we also have a forensic CAMS team on site. So there's a multidisciplinary team approach to young people, and each individual young person has an individual placement plan, an individual education plan, an individual program plan, which all comes together in their placement planning process. Given our numbers of staff to kids ratio, we can provide that bespoke offering to young people. And there are examples of young people who, none of our kids go to school before they come to Oberstown, but every kid in Oberstown goes to school, and the program is altered to fit their needs. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So we deliver the national curriculum, but we also deliver more localized QQI qualifications, FETAC qualifications, etc. So it's an individual bespoke offering that works at the young person's pace, because I might be able to do my Leaving Cert, where somebody else might need to do a very basic literacy course. So capacity to do that is supported by, I suppose, the ACTS, the ECAMS, the teaching team that we on site, and ultimately an individual bespoke program for every young person on campus. So that's resource intensive, it's budget intensive, but ultimately it's the right thing to do, because they've left school, they've committed offences, they've left school because they've been treated like with a herd mentality, and that doesn't work for some young people. So I hope that answers the question.
And there's another question, thanks Damien, about this one's about your models of care, behavioural intervention models to address complex behavioural needs. And you've spoken to me before about some of those, the training that you provide for the staff on a regular basis about to anticipate and to diffuse complex situations. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I suppose I'll because I only touched on it in the presentation. So our overarching framework is called KEHOP. It's care, education, health, offender behaviour, and preparation for leave. And it's trademarked, and we hang everything we do with the young people around these different systems. And there are different teams in place to support those systems. So first, that's really important that there's a framework. But beyond that, in terms of behaviour management, there's a level system, ratings, which I can take it or leave it, I suppose. But ultimately, with challenging behaviour, we worked with a company throughout the years who were formerly known as the Crisis Intervention Institute. We have a program called RAP, or Safety Intervention, and the primary focus on this is early intervention, de-escalation, and equally there's a physical intervention model to it. But that's at the very end of all the attempts to resolve things amicably. Within that, you have an individual behaviour support plan. So we can identify triggers, we can identify responses, and we can do what's appropriate for that young person. And that's in conjunction with the young person. We have a conversation. What are your triggers? What triggers you had? What do we need to know? And we build that into the plan, and they collaborate in that plan with us. And I would say 80% of the time, 90% of the time, that early intervention, that de-escalation works. From time to time, however, and no different to any other institution, ours, there may be a need for physical intervention. And this is when it's gone to when the risk element increased. But in physical intervention, it's non-pain compliant. We're very mindful that they're young people and they're children that we're working with. So after every event, we review it. Are there learnings to be taken from it? There's a hot debriefing. There's an after incident review, and we don't use shields. We don't use riot gear. It's me, the way I am, talking to someone, managing that system. Within that, the majority of issues are resolved in a timely fashion. Injuries are minimal, but I suppose the emphasis on our behalf is to spot the triggers, intervene, and make space for the young person to come back to baseline. So that's how we typically manage it. And again, it's subject to review. We have our own leaders on site who keep an eye on it to make sure it's being used properly. And again, we have regular training or regular drills just to make sure it's being used properly.
Yes, thanks, Damien. And that's what I understood, that you put a lot of emphasis on the training of the staff. Do you want to say a bit more about the sort of qualifications you look for and what the roles of the staffing at the facility?
So we have probably around 250 staff here. We have maybe between 130 and 150 frontline staff. The rest then are in support services, and I'll make no apology, it's 24/7. We need that amount of resource. We have residential social care who look after daytime activity. We have night supervisors who look after night activity. We have teachers and unit managers. The qualification for a residential social care worker is a degree in social care, and we like people to have 3 or 4 years experience before they come into Oberstown.
So can I just interrupt there? So to interpret that for us, so they're like social workers, right? They have a qualification in social work.
It has an element to it. So it's a third level 7 recognised degree, but it's actually in social care as opposed to social work.
Okay.
So there's a slightly different slant to it, because it speaks about, there's a huge element about residential living and all the developmental stages, etc. So,
okay.
But Ireland at the minute has a very hot and buoyant employee market. We full employment, and recruitment is becoming more difficult. Our retention rates are excellent here, because the systems, the supports, the looked after piece is very good. But in coming years, there will be a challenge to that, because this body of workers will be registered and will be recognised as a professional body. What that does then, it creates a level of, the pool narrows, so that the pool of potential recruits narrows, and you'll have every institution in Ireland looking for the same people. So we've had to develop initiatives around graduate programs, about working with different colleges. And I think in maybe 4 to 6 weeks, we have one of the local colleges coming for a careers day here, an open day here. So we're trying to intercept that at the earliest opportunity. So there's a big journey ahead with the registration and the professionalisation, and it may test recruitment.
Thank you, Damien. I think the sound is a bit dodgy now, and we're sort of getting close to time, so I think we might start to wrap up. But I just wanted to get that piece out of you about the staffing, because they're not just considered custodial officers, they're actually considered social welfare. Perhaps that's a better word for us. We have social welfare qualifications here, and that it is about caring for the children.
Yeah. So we're not prison officers. We dress in our normal clothes. We're on first name basis, and it's about the delivery of care to the young people, and it's framed in that care model. It's framed in that relationship model. It's not Mrs. Trunchbull. It's not I'm big, you're small. It's a collaborative space, because that's really important, the relationship piece, because the traumas these kids have experienced, the vulnerability, they have to have someone that they can confide in, because beyond the key hub framework, beyond keeping them secure, if we really want to help them, we've got to help them maximize their potential. And that's why this intensive care approach in a time-bound space is really important. Yeah.
And I think that really answers a couple of the questions I haven't been able to get to about the sort of the children's rights sort of centrality of that in the model, in that what you're trying to do is to build a relational model that is respectful of the children and provides care for them, not just a prison, not just the deprivation of liberty. And the other thing, there was a question actually directed to me, which was about, well, why are we listening to someone from Ireland when you don't have the same Indigenous overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children that we have here? And that is true, that is a difference. But my understanding is that in every country, the children who are incarcerated are the ones coming from situations of complex needs, disadvantage, poverty, marginalisation, and often are a minority group of some kind. And that there are, whilst it's not exactly the same, there are similarities, but at its core, the model of that places the needs of the children at the centre and tries to meet their needs is one, I think that is something for us to think about as well. So that's that was a question to me, Damien, not to you. So
and this might be helpful, but Ireland is approaching maybe a population of 7 million at the minute. There are 400,000 travellers, which is an ethnic minority in Ireland, and they represent a very small percentage of the population. But what we do have is an overrepresentation of travellers in the justice system. It's actually 40,000 travellers in Ireland, which is less than 1% of the population, and 30% of those are in youth justice services. So recognising that Oberstown has recently employed a family traveller worker to recognise their cultural identity, to promote their way of life, because it's very specific. It's slightly different to yours, but something similar occurs here and in other European jurisdictions. They have similar conflicts.
Well, that's right. I mean, the youth justice everywhere is really, it's part of criminalising poverty and trauma and disadvantage, which is something that we all are battling, are we not? Can I just also say, in response to that question, that the other interest, I think, in hearing from someone from an Anglo-Saxon country is that we have a very similar legal and political system to you, and a history, a very similar legal history. And it's of interest to me that you've been able to make the changes that you have, that we're struggling with. But on that note, I'm going to say my thank yous now. First of all, thank you to you, Damien, for battling through the tech and giving us an insight into how you're trying to put the needs of children at the centre of, no one wants children in detention. We all agree about that. But your job is to run a detention centre, and you're trying to put the needs and the rights of children at the centre, and I think that's important for us to hear about. I'd like to thank everyone who's joined tonight, and again, apologies to you for the sound and other tech problems. I think it's very important that in Australia we start to think about other ways of doing things. There needs to be a greater sense of urgency for change here. We have recorded the webinar. We might do a bit of editing through some of the glitches to put it into a nice package, which we'll send out to you. And if you want to reach out with any commentary or questions, you can reach me at kids@humanrights.gov.au. And just finally, Damien mentioned the book that was written about the journey of Oberstown by Professor Kilkelly and Pat Bergen. It's called Advancing Children's Rights in Detention, a Model for International Reform. It's Bristol University Press. You can buy it in Australia, so if anyone wants to read that as well. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, especially Damien, for joining us, and we wish you well with your day and look forward to speaking with you again. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Anne.